Video game preservation is a topic that's gotten a lot of attention lately. Between the imminent closure of the older Nintendo eShop platforms and the announcement that Stadia will officially go offline, taking every game on the service with it, it's clear that many players have the question of how long they'll still be able to play the games they love. I'm a staunch preservationist. I believe that all games should be made available and accessible in as easy a way as possible for everyone. Keeping track of gaming history is important, so we can learn from where we've come from in order to shape where we go next. So the question is, with all the money floating around through the industry, how good is the industry at preserving its own history? How likely is it that you can think of a game you love and easily access it on a modern system? That's what today's video is about, an attempt to measure the success rate of how well the games industry keeps its games available. But how do we measure this? Easy, we get a big list of games and we check every single one to see if those games are available on modern systems. Now, I'm certainly not about to check every game ever made, there's only so much time in my life. We just need a nice representative sample. A list of games that are deemed important, a list that spans decades, covers a number of different systems from the humble microcomputers of the 80s to the big three console platforms of today. Where are we going to get a list like that? This is the 1001 Games You Must Play Before You Die, a book that helpfully provides this list. It goes all the way back to the Oregon Trail and Pong, spans multiple decades, is comprehensive about the systems it covers, there's even an N-Gage game in here, and 1001 is a nice big number that gives a representative sample without being too difficult to manage. It also has another advantage for the purposes of investigating game preservation. This book was published in 2010. 12 years ago, meaning that there is actually no guarantee that even the most recent games in this book are currently available. Some of the more recent games in the book include Heavy Rain, Bioshock 2, and Mass Effect 2, all of which released in or just before February of 2010, so anything released beyond that month is simply not here. This is useful because honestly any list that would go beyond 2013 is going to be skewed by the fact that basically anything released on the PS4 or Xbox One is just inevitably available today due to backwards compatibility. This isn't a perfect list, however. At least 3 games appear twice as separate release versions. 10% of the book is from 2009, as recency bias obviously played a factor at the time it was compiled, and there are a few games in there whose inclusion I simply do not understand. But it's still a solid list that mostly covers a bunch of important games and works for our purposes today. Also, what do I mean by a game being available on modern systems? In short, has the rights holder for the game made it available to play on a modern PC, the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation 5, or the Xbox Series X? While this is generally a game being sold on a digital storefront, I found a few exceptions that I felt made sense to call an official release that'll become clear as we go through the video. Ultimately, we want to find out how good the industry at large is at maintaining its own legacy, based entirely on how many of these games are out there right now legally for you to buy. And to start, let's take a look at what's available on PC. Okay, for this I'm going to focus on the PC digital storefronts: Steam, GOG, Epic, the Microsoft Store, and publisher-specific stores like Origin, Uplay, and Battle.net. I'm not counting something like Humble Bundle because ultimately they're just selling Steam keys, so it's just a Steam release with extra steps. Here is the list of every game available across all these storefronts. I did originally separate them, but it was kind of messy, so just be assured that these are available on most of these storefronts right now in some combination. The bulk of them are on Steam, and that's not really surprising. It's the largest storefront on PC, and almost everything gets released on it, so chances are if a game gets a remaster, it's released there. It's also been around since 2004, so a bunch of these games are available now simply because they released back in the late 2000s and simply have never been taken down. The next best place to go for games on this list on PC is, also kind of unsurprisingly, GOG. After all, GOG does stand for Good Old Games and was set up with the specific goal of bringing old PC games back to modern systems, a natural extension of CD Projekt's original purpose as a Polish distributor for games like Baldur's Gate. In fact, pick a PC game from the 90s that's currently scrolling by, and I almost certainly found it on GOG. It's where I personally got Beneath the Steel Sky from, and even better, it's actually freeware now. The Epic Store is pretty terrible for older games. I found a small handful of these on there, but there was so few that it's simply not worth searching for anything listed here through that store. Their focus is on modern releases and trying to beat Steam without actually featuring anything that makes Steam useful. The Microsoft Store had a decent amount of these, with all but one of them being available via Xbox Game Pass on PC. In fact, I'm going to be honest, I didn't actually search the Microsoft Store directly, I searched through the Xbox app and found a huge chunk of these games on there. This has the advantage of giving access to these games via a subscription, rather than needing to buy each game individually. What was the one exception? The game that I also couldn't find on any other PC storefront? It was Minesweeper. No, really, Minesweeper is in the book, and you know, I can't argue with it as a choice, although I feel like I should. But anyway, it's on the Windows 10 store. Microsoft have added a bunch of modern features like achievements to it, but it is there. The publisher-centric stores were much more limited, especially as they were all just repositories for a single publisher's IP. But in some cases, they're the only place to play that company's games. Do you want to play The Settlers? You've got to buy it direct from Ubisoft. Do you want to play the original StarCraft? It's only on Battle.net, although to be fair to Activision here, it is free. In total, of the 1001 games, I managed to track down a total of 315 games available directly through PC storefronts. It's not a big percentage, but it is a respectable number. Now, it should be noted that there's no guarantee all of these games will work brilliantly on modern PCs. As stated, many of these are simply old releases that never got taken down, and as such aren't optimized for modern PCs. Expect issues if the system requirements say something like Windows Vista or XP, which happens quite frequently, honestly. While I naturally haven't checked all of these games for their performance on a modern Windows 10 PC because I don't have the money to do that, I can confirm issues with one of them, and that's Tomb Raider Legend. Because I bought the Steam version for recording purposes because it's cheap and I knew I'd get better visuals than trying to record the PS2 version, and it's pretty buggy because it was optimized for PCs in 2006. Not in the 2020s. I even had to download a save file at one point due to a game-breaking bug that meant I couldn't finish a level, so be wary of that for literally any game on this list. But still, a third of the book is a good start. But how much further can we go? What's on console that isn't on PC? It's time to take a look at our next system, and for this I'm going to go with the oldest system currently on the market, and also the company who's been in the console business the longest, Nintendo. For the Nintendo Switch, I looked at two separate things. First of all, the eShop was the obvious place, and I searched for each game via that storefront. However, Nintendo have also made some games available in a different way. The Nintendo Switch Online service. While ostensibly a fee for online play, it also allows users to access 4 portals for all the games: the NES, the SNES, the N64, and the Sega Mega Drive. So the list you're seeing now contains every game I was able to find across these services, and every game marked in red is a game that I was unable to find on PC. If it's marked with an asterisk, that means it's available through the Switch Online service, and in most cases is exclusive to that service. N64 and Mega Drive games are only available on the higher tier subscription, which I personally feel is a little too expensive for what it is, but those games are there. This also only includes games available at the time of writing and not games that have been announced as coming to the service in future. I will discuss those games a little later. I actually like the Switch Online collections. It's a great way to bring older games to a newer system without expecting players to buy Super Mario Bros. For a tenner yet again. It's not perfect, of course. Those higher tiers for N64 and Mega Drive are, like I said, overpriced, and games could be removed from these collections at any time. Also, Nintendo's online support is still kinda weird, so while games are now finally tied to an account rather than your physical system, there's no guarantee they won't still throw an arbitrary barrier in one day for some reason when it comes to accessing any games on this list. So how many games do we have now? Well, the full list of games from the 1001 you can play on Switch is 131, which isn't that great because this also includes games that were on PC. If we restrict this to games that aren't already covered by the PC storefronts, that number goes down to just 60, and most of these are Nintendo first-party titles. So we're not even at 400 of the total yet, which isn't great. Maybe we'll do better with some other systems. What's next? So both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X released at about the same time, so let's go with which of the two have been in the console business longer. Time to take a look at PlayStation. For PlayStation, I looked at what games are available via the PlayStation Store on the PlayStation 5. This includes games available as part of the new PlayStation Plus subscription. Similar to the Nintendo list, everything marked in blue on screen right now is a game that I didn't find on PC or Switch, and everything with an asterisk is available via PS Plus. It should be noted as well that not everything here is native to PS5. A lot of these are actually PS4 releases, but since the PS5 has full backwards compatibility with its predecessor, they all count. Similarly, most of the PS3 releases here are only available via subscription, as they're all streamed instead of able to be downloaded to play on the PS5 directly. This annoys a few people, so it's worth mentioning as a caveat. The current version of PlayStation Plus is relatively new too, so the library is still being built. So this only covers what I was able to find at the time of writing the script. But Sony are showing some degree of effort towards preservation through this, as the announcement of this new service coincided with a department dedicated to preservation, and the new version of the service brought more PS1 and PS2 games to the current system, so hopefully this number will increase in future. It's not perfect though, as there have been complaints about the quality of the PS1 emulation, and quite frankly the library for all the consoles simply isn't substantial enough right now. And again, the streaming for PS3 games is a technical compromise that isn't necessarily the best way to preserve these games. So how are we doing on numbers now? Only 142 of the 1001 games are available on PS5, and of those only 35 are games that we haven't already covered, which isn't great, as this brings us only up to 410 total playable games. Maybe Sony would have better results if they stopped trying to remake The Last of Us and Horizon Zero Dawn, and instead focus their attention on re-releasing games that can't already be played on the PS5 instead. But hey, what do I know? Okay, one system left. How does Xbox fare? Unlike the Switch and PS5, I don't own an Xbox Series X, which is the system I'm basing this on. So for this I mostly search for games on the Microsoft website, as everything that is available on Xbox does have an Xbox specific page on there, separate from anything listed for the Microsoft Store on PC. The full console specific Game Pass catalogue is viewable online too, and I consulted that for info on what's available through that service. Again, if it's green in this list, it's a game we haven't covered yet, and anything with an asterisk is on Game Pass. You get how this works now, right? Also, the reason I'm being specific to Series X is just because it's easier to say than if I added the Series S too. Feel free to substitute its smaller cousin if you wish, I don't care, the list applies either way. Xbox have done pretty well for themselves here, as both the push towards Game Pass and the backwards compatibility initiative that they had during the Xbox One era meant that I found a decent amount of stuff. After the fiasco of the TV and sports launch disaster, the company have been trying to regain a focus on games like they're supposed to. Of course, I could be sassy and say it'd be nice if they released some new games sometimes, but I'll refrain from that because that's not what this video is about. As impressive as all this is, it's not perfect. The backwards compatibility program only allows for games that Xbox have approved deals with publishers for, and even their own games aren't fully available. I will discuss that a bit more later. But Game Pass is excellent for preservation conceptually. Having access to a wide library from across gaming history, all for a simple subscription, is rad, and for the most part they do a great job on this. However, while all this is good, the numbers aren't great. While Xbox have more games overall than the other two consoles, it's still only 149, and of these only 21 are games that we haven't already covered, and this is mostly because a lot of what gets released on Xbox also gets released on PC. But this isn't the end of the story, because I've intentionally left some stuff out. Everything you've seen here has largely been available separately, but what if I told you that there were some games that are available on modern systems, just not on their own? It's fairly common for older games to come as collections, and I found plenty of these while digging up games from the book. Some of you may have questioned where Halo was in the Xbox section, for instance, and that's because they're all available as the Master Chief Collection, so here they are. It's not the only collection available from Microsoft either, as the Rare Replay collection on Xbox One, which plays on the Series X, and I believe is also available through streaming on PC, also adds these games. Banjo-Kazooie was already covered on the Switch, by the way. so I've not included it here. Retro compilations are also popular, as several older publishers have them, including some with multiple compilations. Capcom have the Arcade Stadium Collection, the Fighting Collection, and the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, and all of these combined add these games. Bandai Namco have tons of old arcade compilations, so much so that keeping track of what's in each one is pretty difficult. This also includes the Pac-Man Museum Collection that recently released, and all of these Namco collections add these games. Sega are always determined to ensure that Mega Drive games are constantly available in the collection, so there are definitely a few of these. Console versions of Mega Drive Classics still have the Sonic games in them, but on PC you'll need to get the Sonic Origins collection instead. Atari have a ton of options for playing their classic games, including these ones, through either the Flashback Classics collections on console, or the Atari Vault on Steam, although I've compared the lineups and they're largely the same. All of these games are definitely in both. Konami have a few compilations out there as well, and these games can be found on a combination of the Castlevania collections, the Contra collection, and the Konami Arcade Classics collection. And I can confirm personally that the Castlevania collections are excellent. Then there's the Midway Arcade Origins collection, which contains these games. However, one thing to note with this is it's an Xbox 360 release. Admittedly, one that is playable via backwards compatibility, but it is still limited in how available it is, unlike all the other collections here. Warner Brothers have yet to release a more up-to-date collection, and it doesn't seem like a high priority for them to do so either. Then there are the few scattered collections that gave me just one or two results. The Lost Vikings is available through the Blizzard Arcade collection, Secret of Mana is available on Switch via the Collection of Mana, although a remake is available elsewhere. Darius is available through the Darius Cosmic Collection, R-Type is available as part R Type Dimensions, and finally Space Invaders Extreme along with the original Space Invaders are available via various collections, although these vary between platforms for some reason. And finally, more modern games have collections too, the Ninja Gaiden Master Collection, which brings together the 3D Ninja Gaiden trilogy into one package, and two of those games are in the book. The Grand Theft Auto Definitive Collection, while not exactly in a great condition on release, does make the PS2 era Grand Theft Auto games available. And finally, the Sly HD collection is available via PlayStation Plus, making the two Sly games in the book available, but because it's the PS3 collection, it is only available via streaming, so beware. This brings 88 more games into being available for modern systems, bringing us to a grand total of 519 available games. We are now past the halfway mark. This is good. But that can't be everything, right? Let's see if we can dig up some other official releases. On PC, there are a number of legal ways to play games that don't involve the major storefronts, many of them free, and all with a simple Google search. Here are 4 games I managed to find simply available as browser games. Most of them were originally Flash games that have been converted to HTML5 by their developers to preserve them, while Boulder Dash was a game for Atari 8-bit computers that has been officially converted into a browser game for preservation's sake. In addition, a few old text adventures are available in full in browser form today. Some are public domain, such as Eamon, while the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy game is run from the BBC's website. I sadly cannot vouch for how accessible this is outside the UK though, since sometimes I know the BBC website can be a bit restrictive like that. The Oregon Trail is an interesting one too, as the place I found it was the Oregon Tourist Board website. Strange place perhaps, but the game was designed to teach school kids about the actual Oregon Trail, so it checks out that it has been licensed by the state's tourist board. There is also a visual version releasing for PC and Switch soon, but this tourist board version is the closest you'll get to the original text-based experience. Then there's a ton of games available as freeware. All of these games are readily available from the developers' websites. Most notable here is Elite, which is still a very active IP, as Frontier Developments continue to update Elite Dangerous, but as a matter of history and celebration, they've made the original BBC micro game free to download from their site, which is cool. Then there are the freeware titles that aren't directly available from the developer, but are out there. Mercenary, an open world game from 1985, has a number of freeware clones available from a dedicated site. Marathon Infinity is preserved by the community, as Bungie made the whole series freeware years ago, and Psyops the Mindgate Conspiracy appears to have become freeware somewhere along the way, and can be found hosted on a site called Major Geeks. This last one's a strange one, as all the info I found was a bit wishy-washy and I couldn't track the full trail of info, but from all sources I could find, it does seem to be a legal download. Then there are two other games readily available. Armadillo Run, a puzzle game released through the developer's website, is still available to buy, and the site has been kept up to date as recently as 2019, so I assume it's still available today. Then there's Naked War, a multiplayer game played via email, which appears to still be active, although without signing up and engaging with it directly, I can't completely confirm this. So with all that, that's a total of 17 games available today in some form, which brings our grand total up to 536 of the 1001 games. But there has to be more, right? Well, there is one place we can look, but it's a little strange.
Yeah, I could waste some quarters about now.
And by that I mean Life is Strange, because in Life is Strange True Colours there is a bar in town which has arcade machines, one of which is Arkanoid. And despite my best efforts, this was pretty much the only official way I could find to play Arkanoid on a modern system. There is the recently released Eternal Battle, but that appears to be a completely new game. If you want to play the original on a modern system, you have to play Life is Strange. Yes, really. I'm not joking. Weirdly, it's not the only game from the book that I found that this applies to. Let's take a look at the Yakuza series, specifically Yakuza 0. It's fully playable on modern systems, and it contains the Sega Club arcades, which contain classic Sega arcade games from the 80s, making it pretty much the only place you can play Outrun and Super Hang-On on a modern system. It's also the only place you can play Space Harrier if you don't have a Switch. It's not the only instance of Sega doing this, as the only place I could find you could get House of the Dead Overkill is by buying Typing of the Dead Overkill on Steam, which has it as an optional mode. Unlike the previous examples though, this one's just on the main menu, so you don't need to play an otherwise unrelated game to get access to it. There's also Time Splitters 2, which can be found in its entirety inside Homefront The Revolution. However, this isn't the only place it can be found. You may have seen it on the Xbox list as a backwards compatible title. Just figured I'd mention it because it is another example of this happening. LEGO Dimensions is an interesting one because I don't know how accessible the arcade game expansion is these days. But since the game is technically playable on modern systems, it may be possible to play Blasteroids, Clax, and Paperboy through it, which is also the only place you can access these games as they're inexplicably not in the Midway Arcade Origins compilation. Also, another one I'm not entirely sure about is Prince of Persia. While the original game isn't available anywhere, at least if you don't count atrocious looking mobile remakes, Sands of Time is on Steam, and I know for a fact that the original Prince of Persia is buried within it as an Easter egg, or at least it was for the PS2 version that I played back in the day. I cannot vouch for its presence in the Steam version though, but if it is there, then it's another example of this. If we assume that all of these are available, that's 10 games buried within other games, 8 of which can't be played anywhere else. And if we count just those 8, that brings our total up to 544 games. We're doing surprisingly well here, but we still have just under half the book unaccounted for. Perhaps it's time that we held our nose and delved into the murky world of mobile gaming. Why haven't I counted mobile platforms as modern systems up to this point, I hear you ask? Put simply, I really hate mobile gaming. It's a cesspit of casino machines disguised as games, with so many mobile-specific titles designed to just make you spend constantly. And while there sometimes can be good games buried within it all, you do have to wade through all of that stuff on unmoderated storefronts, and I find it simply just not worth it, and I don't really pay attention to the platform as a result. But we do need to acknowledge it, because I did find some games from the book on Google Play and the App Store, and nowhere else. For instance, some of the mobile-specific games from the book are still available. Trism, One Dot Enemies, and Spider the Secret of Bryce Manor are among some of the stranger choices in the book, but they are out there for you to play. The first two are on iOS, while the latter is on Android. I also found all of these games between the two platforms too. Most of these were games for other systems, but today can sadly only be found on mobile, which is a shame for Spectrum enthusiasts and Professor Layton fans who also dislike mobile gaming like I do. There are also a few remakes on mobile that I found. Square Enix especially love this tactic, as 3 of their games that I found were mobile remakes, including 2 Dragon Quest titles. That said, most of these remakes are fairly faithful to the originals, so I'll count them, which brings us to a total of 15 games available on mobile, meaning a grand total of 559 available games from the book. But we are still not done, because there are some other systems worth looking at, although availability is questionable here. The Evercade is a handheld system specifically designed to play retro titles. All of its releases are compilation cartridges that hold several games, usually on a theme, such as Atari collections, Namco collections, Amiga collections. There's so many different types of collection that we could be here a while. I decided to dig through the library of available titles to see if there are any games in the book currently unaccounted for. And after spending a lot of time cross-checking every release with both the book and the list of titles that I'd already covered, I managed to find a grand total of 2 games. Fantasy World Dizzy is available as part of Mystery World Dizzy in the Oliver Twins collection, while the Codemasters collection contains Megalomania. And that was all I found. I found a ton of games that were already covered elsewhere, but these 2 are exclusively on Evercade right now. But wait, what about the mini consoles? You know, the ones which come with a bunch of preloaded games? Let's look at those. We can largely forget the Mega Drive Mini because pretty much its entire library is available elsewhere. Let's have a look at Nintendo systems. Okay, the NES one is pretty much covered elsewhere too, but the SNES, now that has something for us. It has Super Mario RPG. That's it. As far as I can tell, that is the only place to access that game right now. Okay, what about the PlayStation Classic? I know it was a bit rubbish, but maybe it has something for us. Surprisingly, I found 4 games, although you'd need both a Western and a Japanese release to cover all of them. While Ridge Racer Type 4 and Tekken 3 are available on both, Grand Theft Auto is exclusive to the West, while Devil Dice is exclusive to Japan. I also managed to track down some games on the microcomputer throwback systems. The Amiga A500 Mini has 2 games that I couldn't find elsewhere, while the Commodore 64 Mini had 5 games that seemingly aren't available elsewhere. Of course, the principal problem with these mini systems is how hard they are to get hold of. They're not always in production, and sometimes they can be pricey to track down. Which is a shame, because that's 12 titles we can potentially add to our total. If we combine that with the 2 from the Evercade as well, that brings our grand total up to 571. Also, I found out that Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is getting an arcade reissue soon, but that's kind of obscure, and I barely count it, but I guess it's coming back in some form, I guess. Okay, there's actually another bunch of games that are available, but there is a problem with them. You see, one significant barrier to preservation efforts is the live service game, as these games persistently update themselves, adding new content, improving and changing existing content, and even flat out removing stuff. Despite the book's age, there are a bunch of live service games in it. Mostly MMOs, although one MOBA is in there, and it's somehow not League of Legends, despite it releasing in 2009 and exploding. Instead, that MOBA is Demigod, a game that is still available from Steam, but has 0 online support anymore. So you can play it with bots, but you can't play it online. Every other game, as I said, is an MMO. Surprisingly, most of them are still active and supported to this day. Here's a full list. That's 8 MMOs, all still playable today, and if you add Demigod to that total, that brings us up to 579, as long as you're willing to look past the fact that many of these probably don't resemble their original forms anymore. Hell, both World of Warcraft and RuneScape have gotten so far away from where they used to be that they've had to release old school or classic versions to bring them back, but even those versions have had updates that change them further. There are 3 more MMOs in the book which are no longer active. Phantasy Star Online and PlanetSide have been replaced by their sequels, while City of Heroes has been shut down but remains unofficially active due to fan efforts. I'm not going to count them towards our total though, as none of them are officially available. But MMOs aren't the only issue when it comes to keeping games preserved. My goal with this investigation was to find modern releases that get you as close as possible to the original experience. Some publishers don't want this though and would prefer to update their back catalogue instead of just making it available again. Here's a list of every game that I was only able to find on modern systems in the form of a remake, along with the name they're known as in their new form, and the changes each remake has made compared to the original. Some of these are minimal changes, such as the likes of Shadow of the Colossus, which is basically just the original game with flashier visuals, while others are vastly different experiences. I don't think anyone in their right mind could call the 1998 and 2019 versions of Resident Evil 2 the same game. And then to make things worse, you have remakes such as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, the Wipeout Omega Collection, and Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania, which remake multiple games at once and smush them together as a single package, and that just complicates things even further, especially as all of them have added new exclusive content too, such as new skaters in Tony Hawk who weren't even born when the first game came out, or Sega character costumes in Monkey Ball. There's also the interesting case of Tactics Ogre Reborn, which is an incredibly recent remake, which itself was derived from an earlier remake of the specific game from the book that we're talking about, Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together, which I also find notable for being one of the few games in history to be openly named after a Queen song. There is also Warcraft 3, which got overhauled as Reforged, and that was famously broken in every way, and Blizzard even removed the original release from PC while they were at it. There's also Thrust Legend, which bills itself as a remake of the original Thrust, but I wasn't able to determine if it was official in any way. There are also 4 unusual cases of games that were either based on existing games in other mediums, or games that have been cloned so often that it's basically public domain at this point. While Snake in the book is the famous Nokia 3310 time waster, and Sokoban is supposed to be the original PC 8800 release, both games have seen so many clones they're technically available in some remade form. Then there's Slitherlink, which in the book is supposed to be the DS puzzle series release, but because they're just a type of logic puzzle, there are countless Slitherlink games out there that operate under the same principles. Also, the Xbox 360 version of Uno is in the book, and while that version isn't available, there are officially licensed Uno games out there on modern systems, and it's fundamentally still based on the same physical card game. You just can't get Kinect video chat in the current versions. Finally, in terms of new versions, Fly Wrench is an utterly bizarre entry in the book, as that game was not finished at the time of publication. Instead, it was available as an incomplete prototype, with the final release arriving in 2015, which is what is available today. I really don't understand why this is in the book, because I've never heard of it before and it wasn't actually finished at the time. I'm not going to be counting these remakes and alternate versions towards the final total, but we can count all 36 as almost available. Speaking of almost available, at the time of writing this video, a bunch of games are not currently available, but maybe by the time you watch this. For a start, let's talk about Fatal Frame: Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, one of 3 games that at the time of the book's publication had not left Japan. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I am pretty hype about the fact that this is finally getting an official Western release in March. Hell yes. The same Nintendo Direct that confirmed that game's release also confirmed that 1080 Snowboarding and Excitebike 64 would also be coming to the Switch Online service, which gives us 2 more. That and somehow GoldenEye for the N64 would be getting released on there and also on Xbox Game Pass, in what had to be one of the most complex licensing agreements in video game history. Nintendo have also confirmed 2 other games from the book will be remade. Front Mission is gradually popping up in remake form, and the first game should be out by now, but Front Mission 3, the game specifically in the book, will be coming after the second one is done. Also, Advance Wars is getting a remake, although you can blame Russia for that not already being available. Elsewhere, Grim Grimoire has a remaster already available in Japan, but I've got no idea if it's coming to the West, while Persona 3 is coming to modern systems. In fact, that was the case when I wrote this, but as I record this, it should already be out now. Also, when I first started putting this video together, I found out that the arcade game OutZone had never left arcades. But then, during production, it suddenly turned up with a Steam page, giving it its first home release ever. At the time of recording this, it is listed to be released on Valentine's Day 2023. Finally, there is confirmation that a remake of Silent Hill 2 is on the way, although it is being made by Bloober Team, so there's no guarantee it'll match the quality of the original. Sadly, that original is not currently available outside of a really bad HD remaster that is only on Xbox. So all that gives us another 7 confirmed releases and 3 more remakes on the horizon, putting our totals up to 586 and 39 respectively. There may also be more coming that isn't fully confirmed, but it seems likely. Sony have all but confirmed the Ridge Racer series will be coming to PlayStation Plus at some point, notably because their Italian, British and Japanese arms have all announced and then quickly retracted the release of Ridge Racer 2 from the PSP in a move that's becoming increasingly comical. While that game isn't in the book, the original Ridge Racer as well as the original PSP title are, and with one game almost certainly coming soon at some point, it's possible we could see the rest of the series follow suit, making these 2 games available and potentially giving a wider release to Type 4. Also, there is one Siphon Filter game in the book, Logan's Shadow. While this isn't available at the time of writing, a ratings board listing for 4 titles in the series did show up online, including this one, and 3 of those titles have since joined PlayStation Plus, meaning it's probably only a matter of time before this one does too. There are also 3 games that allegedly will be seeing releases on the Intellivision Amico, which allegedly is a system that's set to release. Allegedly. I'm sure you've all seen that H-Bomber Guy video by now, you know what I'm talking about here, and also why I have my doubts about these games releasing at all. Tommy Tallarico's mother is very proud, of course. Also in my search for games, I found these, which I deem to be releases of questionable legality. They were all available to play in some form, usually in browser or on mobile, but I absolutely could not verify if they were official releases from the rights holders. And since this video is supposed to be about whether or not rights holders are making their own games available, they don't really count towards that goal unless I can confirm this. On a similar note, we also have Chucky Egg, Lemmings, and Lode Runner, which seemingly do exist in official forms but appear to be cheap mobile reboots with terrible visuals that were likely knocked up in an afternoon in order to release something in order to keep the IP. I don't count these because they're awful, and I'm also not clear on how closely they stick to the original games. Their own descriptions don't really make it clear. They're quite bad. And then we have some games that are in limbo for other reasons. For instance, the Xbox backwards compatibility works in interesting ways. I found 5 games from the book that were listed for Xbox, but not actually available to buy. After doing some digging, it seems that these games are in fact playable on a modern Xbox, but you either need to own a digital copy from a previous system, or track down a second-hand copy. So, they're compatible, but they're not strictly available. Sticking with Microsoft briefly, I also want to highlight that I found Geo Defense Swarm available from the Microsoft Store, exclusively for mobile. I looked into this, and it's the Windows Phone release, which is a platform that no longer exists. It also released for iOS, but it has been removed from iOS, despite that platform actually existing. So it is available for a platform that no longer exists, and is unavailable for the one that does. It's very strange. So, a behind the scenes note, this video has actually been in production for about a year at this point and constantly pushed back for one reason or another. This means that it started before PlayStation switched the Plus service over to its current form. So initially I had a list of available titles which included PlayStation Now, as it was at the time. And Sony have been a little bit naughty because they've quietly removed games from the service during its transition. These 5 games were on PlayStation Now at the time, but are currently nowhere to be found on PlayStation Plus in its current form. To be fair to Sony, Daytona USA is also one of those weird Xbox games I just mentioned, so it's clear there's a Sega issue at play there, and Metal Gear Solid 4 is no doubt the fault of Konami, but the other 3 are Sony first-party titles. It's possible, however, that these games may resurface. After all, at one point while writing this, the Sly Cooper games were also on this list, but Sony have since snuck them back onto the service. I mean, there was definitely a missed opportunity for putting Chains of Olympus on there around the release of God of War Ragnarok, but what do I know? And then there is Nintendo, who have this massive list of games that are currently technically available, but will not be for very long. All of these games are currently on the Wii U and 3DS eShops, which will be shut down in a matter of months. Maybe even by the time you've watched this, all these games are already gone. The announcement of the store closure was partly why I made this video to talk about preservation in the first place, because just look at this list of games that are soon going to be lost, simply because Nintendo has yet to bring them to their most modern system, a system that's now the third best-selling console of all time. They should probably sort that out really, let's be honest. You might wonder, what is the big deal about Nintendo closing the eShop for Wii U and 3DS? They're old systems, they can't keep the servers on forever. Yeah, well, this isn't the first rodeo for Nintendo. And in fact, I discovered that 8 games in the 1001 Games book are no longer available due to the prior closures of the Wii Shop channel and whatever the DS equivalent was, I forget. It didn't have a catchy tune to help me remember it. Anyway, as far as I can tell, most if not all of these games simply have no other option available left to play them. They were never ported to other systems. Mighty Flip Champs is the exception to this, but its only port was part of the PlayStation Minis program, which requires either a PS3 or PSP to access today. Oh, these are far from the only games to become unavailable due to online services. Numerous mobile games originally for iOS have gone simply because Apple keep bricking old models of their devices so they can keep overcharging you to buy the latest iPhone and its expensive proprietary charger. I don't like Apple. Can you see why? This includes games like Choo Choo Rocket, which Sega released a mobile port for, which has now vanished and has yet to be put on anything else. The death of Flash has had a similar effect because while Quad Radius still has an active website, the game itself is inaccessible due to Flash functionality. Then there are a couple of games that still have Steam pages but are no longer available for purchase, although it's not clear why. Naturally, some games are gone because online server support no longer exists. The Metal Gear series is currently in limbo because Konami are apparently too cheap to pay for a simple stock footage license. And then there's Nobi Nobi Boy, a game whose entire concept kind of relied on being there at the time and is quite difficult to preserve as a game. Oh, and Nintendo, don't think I forgot for 1 second about the Switch ports of the Mario games that you released for exactly 1 year and then delisted them. This is not how you preserve games. And then there are the games that are seemingly no longer available because a newer game is on the market. Every single one of these games exists in a newer, shinier form. And while that might be fine from the publisher's perspective, it's not from mine. Dissidia NT is a worse game than the PSP titles, this is a basic fact. Little Big Planet 1 and 2 have completely different and better campaigns than the third game. OG Prey and Arcane's Prey are totally different games. And while Smash Ultimate is excellent, it's no reason to leave Melee and Brawl stuck on older systems. And sure, Tetris Effect is a brilliant game, but that's no reason to pretend the Game Boy game isn't deserving of some kind of preservation. The worst example of this one has to be both ISS Pro Evolution and Pro Evolution Soccer 3, which have both effectively been replaced by Konami's eFootball. And look, I'm not into football, but even I can see that that's a much worse offer for anyone who's into that kind of thing. Okay, since we're pretty much on the subject, it's time to say something I never say. Let's talk about sports. No less than 18 games in the book are licensed sports games, and we all know what that means. That's right, exactly 1 year after release, and these games are dead to everyone in existence, doomed to clutter up the shelves of CEX who can't even shift them for a penny a copy. These are the ultimate replaced by sequels games, because they are endlessly being replaced. It's bad for preservation, and I dread to think how much sports fans end up spending on these things. But there are a lot of other games in the book affected by licensing in the same way sports games are. Motorsports gets this too, but in even more ways. Beyond just the licensing of the actual race tournaments, licensed racing games also have the problems of getting the cars themselves. After all, why would Microsoft or Sony renew license agreements with Toyota or Ford to re-release Forza Motorsport 2 or the original Gran Turismo, when they can simply apply new licensing agreements to Forza Horizon 5 or Gran Turismo 7. This also affects a couple of racing games where the licensing was only a small element. The lack of Outrun 2 on modern systems is likely down to needing to renew a license from Ferrari, Midtown Madness 3 is full of minis, and even Sega Rally Championship had official licensing from Toyota and Lancia. We're not done on license issues though. 10 games in the book also suffer from being based on pre-existing movie, TV, comic, or even toy franchises. It might be difficult to get Spider-Man 2 for the 6th generation re-released when Sony has a stranglehold on the property these days, and Codemasters probably don't feel the need to beg Hasbro for the rights to their toys when they can simply continue to sell a less interesting mobile quality Micro Machines game. It's the same thing, right? But I'll tell you who's really awkward to deal with when it comes to licensing: the music industry. I found so many games in the book that are no longer available, most likely because the music industry is likely overcharging for the rights to hear a No Doubt song from the early 2000s in a video game. Now you might think that only 5 games doesn't sound like much of an issue, but there are a whole suite of music-based games that are affected by a separate issue. Yes, the dreaded plastic peripheral genre, because it's hard to justify keeping these games alive when they require the manufacturing cost of a massive bit of expensive kit to operate. So while the music-based games also have licensing problems, they also require guitars, drums, microphones, 2 different kinds of DJ turntable, maracas, and bongos. The bongos are also required for a non-music game as well. But that's not all, because this full list also requires Wii remotes, Move controllers, light guns, a specialist camera device, a dance mat, a specialist balance board, an absurdly huge mech control panel, and most importantly, a massive plastic horse. Look, I didn't put Final Furlong in the book, the writers did, and here we are, musing on the fact that maybe the reason it's not easy to preserve is because where do you even put this horse? Beyond that were the games in a situation where a game in the same series was available, but not the specific one from the book. This includes the likes of Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, and 2 separate Star Wars games which aren't available despite the prevalence of other games in those franchises available today. Sega sequels like Crazy Taxi 3, House of the Dead 2, and Jet Set Radio Future aren't available despite their predecessors being out there, alongside the likes of R-Type Delta, Tecmo Super Bowl, and Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins from other publishers. Games like Killer Instinct, Tekken, and Virtua Fighter aren't available in their original forms, despite some sequels getting re-releases. And then Sony bafflingly have only included the most recent Resistance and Motorstorm titles on PS Plus, leaving older titles from the book like Resistance 2, Pacific Rift, and the original Motorstorm back on the PS3. And finally, we have the games that simply had such limited releases to begin with that they've seemingly been forgotten by all but the authors of the 1001 Games book. This includes games which stayed hidden away in Japan or a super limited Europe only release, arcade games which produced very few units, a game that originally released as a hidden extra in a different game, a game that released exclusively on a demo disc, and a game for the goddamn Nokia N-Gage service. None of these are likely to see a re-release anytime soon, I imagine. And while these are all the games I was able to come up with a potential reason for their unavailability, there are still 154 games unaccounted for entirely. And it's time to admit that if you truly want to attempt to play all 1001 games, you're gonna need to indulge in some piracy. 40 games of this remaining lot popped up in my searches on Abandonware sites, where community-driven efforts are made to extract the original files of older titles and release them in a free format that can be played on modern PCs, simply because the rights holders aren't interested. It is technically illegal, as an IP such as Civilization is very much owned by Take-Two Interactive, and they certainly didn't authorize the first 2 games being released this way. But at the same time, I feel like publishers are also aware of the dangerous legal precedent they'd open themselves up to if they did try and force these sites to stop. After all, there's a simple argument here. Most copyright or trademark infringement cases typically hinge on loss of revenue or someone else profiting off their property. It's much harder to argue the Abandonware sites are violating either of these things when the games are all available for free, meaning the people putting them out there aren't making any money off them, and because there simply is no legal way to obtain these games, the IP holder is making no profit as the games simply aren't for sale. Many of these sites have a habit of taking games down if the publisher does throw the game up on GOG or something too, They don't exist to do anything malicious after all, they simply want these games to be available and accessible no matter how old they are. They are in the interest of preservation, not taking money away from creators. This is also where emulation comes in, as the remaining 114 games are, as far as I can tell, only available through ROMs and ISOs run through emulation software, or through second-hand sales that require the original hardware. I brought this up in my recent Fatal Frame retrospective as I detailed how I was forced to use emulation to make the video at all, as none of the PS2 games are available in a modern format. Would I have bought a remaster for the video? You better believe I would have done, and it wouldn't have been the first time I'd have done that. Final Fantasy X-2, I'm looking at you. This list is going to keep scrolling by, showing you how little the rights holders for these games care about keeping them available, and yet are quite happy to continue hoarding the IP. Nintendo, in particular, are notorious for constantly forcing cease and desist notices to anywhere illegally releasing their games, but all I have to say is, simply release them legally then. There's clearly an audience wanting to access them, just stop blocking people from playing F-Zero GX. This is also why efforts to try and shut down second-hand game sales also feel ridiculous, as the only other option to find these games is to hit up retro markets and find second-hand copies. But the problem with older copies is that they're going to last about as long as the condition that they're in. If you're like me and still have PS1 games that look brand new due to meticulous care, that's great. But not every used copy was this well loved. The games industry is gradually getting better at preserving its own history. The fact that I managed to find legal ways to play the majority of games in this book is a good sign, but it's clear there is more work to do. Abandonware and emulation efforts by fans are great, but more publisher support is required. We need more backwards compatibility, more preservation efforts, and more ways to keep games playable on modern systems, preferably not via overpriced remasters too, or Sony pointless remakes, for instance. Why do we need another release of Horizon Zero Dawn? I don't know. Because preservation is important. While I do have an issue with some of the game choices in the book, this is still a solid representation of a lot of games important to the wider medium. Games that defined genres and set standards for things to follow, and all of it needs to be available, in my opinion. Sure, a game like Myst might not be the graphical powerhouse it was in 1993, and Super Mario Bros. Isn't the vast sprawling epic you might be looking to play these days, but playing games like this and knowing what came before helps us to make better stuff going forward. There are obstacles to maintaining the existence of every game, of course, but I'd rather see valiant efforts to try rather than disposable live services and games going into a Disney-esque vault so that they can be released at full price at a later date. Yes, I'm talking about you, Nintendo, because games are important and should be as accessible to all as possible. So, we've come to the end of this journey at long last, and I thank you for joining me. I hope it's been an interesting look into the mess that is video game preservation, and now it's time to formally answer the question that sparked this whole video. Yes, you can play a lot of the 1001 games you must play before you die legally, but you certainly can't play all of them, which is kind of awkward, because according to the book title, you must. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. It was kind of a bit of a weird passion project for me that took a whole year to make, so if you're wondering why a lot of videos didn't come out last year, it's because I was working on this. Most of it wasn't even the editing, it was just research. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. It was a lot of fun to put together. If you want to support me doing more deep dives like this, then I have a Patreon, which you can find the link in the description. Would appreciate your support. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff. And that's all I have to say. If you've got any thoughts about game preservation or the contents of this video in general, leave a comment down below. And I'll see you again very soon.